This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The Ethiopian army to carry out strikes until order is restored in Tigray. DR Congo Health Minister declares end of the latest Ebola epidemic. And China proposes solutions for reviving world economy at BRICS summit in Moscow. A pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment. But first, here's Ramanyang with the day's business headlines.
That's right, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up for the course of the hour. We'll explore why South Africa's president is pitching the country as an attractive investment destination. And as the World Bank delegation is in Cairo to monitor Egypt's economic policies, what outcomes are they seeing on the table? We'll have the details on those stories and plenty more in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And let's begin the hour in Ethiopia. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says the country's defense forces have orders to carry out strikes in the northern Tigray region until the government considers law and order restored. The strikes are against forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the ruling party in the region. The Prime Minister's announcement follows the expiry of a 72-hour window given to the TPLF to surrender. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
What the Ethiopian government calls a law enforcement mission in its northern region of Tigray is now almost 2 weeks old. It is said the nation's army is on its final heavy offensive against the TPLF.
The mission of upholding the law and sovereignty is ongoing at the moment, strengthened more than the days before. The unfaithful group is facing the strong arms of the National Defense Forces, and the law enforcement measures are particularly being taken on the rogue force by avoiding as much as possible any civilian casualties. The mission now is gaining a number of victories in all battlefields and will continue this until the group surrenders for the constitutional order.
And already people have come out on the streets across the country to show support and respect for the National Defense Forces. The office of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says the rally is seen as a huge morale boost for the army.
This 2-minute activity, which entailed standing in honor for the National Defense Forces and also giving them a morale boost and encouraging them that the Ethiopian people are behind them, are supporting them, and are also supporting the finalization of this rule of law operation with the minimum impact to civilians. But this is planned, or the whole rule of law operation is planned with the perspective of bringing lasting peace and stability to Ethiopia, particularly within the Tigray region, as well as all other regions in the country.
As the heavy battle is ongoing in the north through infantry attacks and repeated airstrikes, aid agencies have voiced concerns of a humanitarian crisis. Thousands of people from Tigray have crossed the border into Sudan looking for safety and shelter. The Ethiopian government is calling on citizens to return to their homes.
The National Defense Forces are in a position to enable those that have fled the country to come back to their original locales, that the National Defense Forces will be protecting their property, any properties that they've left behind when fleeing out of fear. In addition as well, the National Defense Forces is also standing ready to support them in rehabilitating them back to their locales as well, and ensuring that their peace is also secured.
Communication and power remain largely cut off in the Tigray regional state, and it's almost impossible to gain tangible information from that area. The international community as well as neighboring states still are calling for the resolution of the conflict in Ethiopia through dialogue. Such repeated calls are now being made by the UN, the African Union, and neighboring states such as Kenya and Sudan. Ethiopian authorities, however, say the effort of finding solutions through peaceful means has expired, and such an effort won't return until the mission of law enforcement ends successfully. Grumchara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
And we earlier spoke to Dr. Mustafa Yusuf, chair of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies. We began by asking him how he sees the Ethiopian conflict ending. Take a listen.
Well, the conflict will end with serious destabilization of Ethiopia. If it's going to be a drawn-out conflict, then we will see possibly the entire Ethiopia destabilized. The other regions, like the Oromo and the Somali region, might start having ideas about starting off conflicts because Abiy Ahmed, the prime minister, has not met their demands, and so it's going to be tough for Ethiopia. Secondly, there will be a lot of refugees. Already we've seen refugees moving across west into Sudan, and shortly, if this conflict is going to continue and sub-conflicts are going to be produced out of it, we will see refugees coming down south into Kenya. And of course, Eritrea will be one of the major entities, state actors in the region that will intervene, most likely to fight alongside Ethiopia to punish the Tigray. Abiy Ahmed has to unilaterally declare a ceasefire, even if it's a temporary one. Then IGAD and the African Union need to intervene immediately. And the reason why I'm saying this is it's going to be very challenging for the entire Horn of Africa if this conflict will be allowed to go on. And so with the Security Council, United Nations Security Council resolution, the AU and IGAD should move in swiftly and mediate between the breakaway, the region that has decided that it does not want to heed Ethiopia's authority.
The UN Refugee Agency has estimated that 4,000 people are arriving daily in Sudan from Ethiopia. The UNHCR warned a full-scale humanitarian crisis is unfolding due to conflict in the Tigray region. CGTN's Wanja Mungai has the details.
A mass exodus is underway. Ethiopians in the warring Tigray region are seeking refuge in the neighboring Sudan. They are fleeing the ongoing war between the armed forces and the local government. The 2 weeks-long conflict has endangered their lives. Ganite is one of the refugees. Together with her family, they managed to cross a river near the border to access Hamdayat camp in Sudan.
I don't know, but there was heavy fighting and many people died. After that, they told us to leave, so we fled. Everyone did.
Back home, people are running out of basic amenities like food, fuel and medical supplies. Now the United Nations warns of a looming major humanitarian crisis.
Refugees who are now arriving at the pace of 4,000 per day are coming out of Ethiopia really scared, afraid, with the stories saying that they have been fleeing heavy fighting. And there's no sign of the fighting to stop right now.
The UNHCR describes the crisis as the region's worst in 2 decades. So far, an estimated 27,000 people are already in Sudan. The UN reports that 4,000 people arrive there daily, in fear that the numbers could increase. Sudan has been safe haven for refugees fleeing conflict from Chad, Eritrea, Central African Republic, and South Sudan. The support system on the ground is also getting overwhelmed.
Our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that they and their partners continue to call for the protection of civilians in Tigray, respect for international humanitarian law, and ways to assess needs and ensure that aid continues to reach areas affected by the conflict. Roads to the Tigray region remain blocked, and our partners warn that supplies will soon be exhausted, putting millions at risk of food insecurity and disease.
With the globe grappling with the coronavirus pandemic, the authorities are fearing that this could make the already bad situation worse. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
The health minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo has declared an end to the country's latest Ebola outbreak. Dr. Iteni Longondo says the disease was contained nearly 6 months after the first cases were announced in the northwestern province of Equator. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has the story.
Health workers in the DRC have been struggling to contain the country's 11th Ebola outbreak in Equator province. The outbreak occurred in an area with a dense rainforest, making it difficult for them to reach patients. Officials recorded 130 Ebola cases and 55 deaths since June this year. But they've managed to win the battle against the disease.
Je suis heureux de déclarer solennellement la fin.
I'm happy to solemnly declare the end of the 11th epidemic of the Ebola virus in the DRC's province of Equator.
Scientists say the Ebola virus is found in wild animals like monkeys and bats. Those animals are a delicacy in the area where the latest Ebola outbreak occurred. The DRC health minister has warned the public against eating such meat.
We are sensitizing the community about the dangers of eating bushmeat. In our country, there's a culture of eating meat from wild animals, but we have to stop it to prevent the spread of diseases like Ebola.
International health organizations have provided the DRC with financial and technical support to help end this outbreak.
The World Health Organization will continue putting all the effort needed to support the DRC strengthen its surveillance systems to ensure that there's no resurgence of Ebola.
The disease broke out in June as the country grappled with another Ebola outbreak in the east and other epidemics like measles, monkeypox, and the COVID-19 pandemic.
Congolese officials have attributed the containment of the country's 11th Ebola outbreak to the commitment of health workers, the cooperation of the community, and the availability of vaccines. They say more than 40,000 people were vaccinated during the outbreak. Authorities are now working on strengthening the detection of the disease across the country. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
The divided governments in Libya have been working on a unified state budget in recent weeks. The move strengthens progress towards bringing back central management under a transitional government over the next months. Here's Adel Makhroui with the details.
With Libyans intending to hold general elections in December next year, the focus in the peace process is shifting to the executive authority that will lead that mission. For years, opposing government administrations have been running independent of each other.
Frankly, I think you need a unified executive to organize anything, a referendum, anything on a national basis. A unified executive, unified institutions.
To reach that, the Government of National Accord and its rival Eastern-based administration have been working to unify the government budget. It's a crucial step to centralize the government's authority in the oil-rich nation.
A unified budget will greatly reflect on the government and economic institutions in Libya. It is currently randomly planning its spending, which weakens its financial planning capabilities, or having proper economic planning that is leading to the state's failure to provide basic services.
But since the Deputy Prime Minister of the Government of National Accord, Ahmed Ma'atiq, announced the intent of forming a consolidated budget 4 weeks ago, no breakthroughs have been announced. The GNA's estimated budget for 2021 is around $39 billion, while the Eastern-based government's expected budget could go up to $6.6 billion.
The political division is the biggest challenge to the unified budget. The budget talks lack clear financial regulation to the military and security institution. Libya has many exchange rates in its different regions, which is another challenge for the central bank to regulate trade or to form a consistent budget.
Last September, the GNA and the Libyan National Army, financed almost fully by the Eastern administration, agreed on lifting the oil blockade the latter imposed. In return, the deal stated that a fair distribution of wealth among all Libyan regions will be in place. This week, the country's oil production exceeded 1.2 million barrels a day. A unified budget is the backbone of any financial agreement between Libyan rivals. For that to happen, complete restructuring of government facilities must take place to restore centralized authority. In other words, if Libya manages to create one budget that satisfies everyone, the country will no longer be divided. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Let's shift focus now to the BRICS summit. The bloc's 5 countries say they remain committed to a multilateral approach to global issues in a joint statement released Tuesday. Chinese President Xi Jinping made proposals for reviving the world economy in a keynote speech. Take a listen.
China will work with other parties to flesh out the BRICS partnership on new industrial revolution at a faster pace. We will open in Xiamen, Fujian province, a BRICS partnership on new industrial revolution innovation center, and we welcome the active participation of fellow BRICS countries.
In the Moscow Declaration, as it's called, BRICS members say they seek to establish a more fair, equitable and representative multipolar international system. The declaration called on the international community to uphold sovereign equality of all states and respect each country's territorial integrity and mutual respect for the interests and concerns of all. The countries reaffirmed the principles of non-intervention in the internal affairs of states and called the international community to follow international law and the UN Charter. The countries also pledged to work closer together to combat terrorism, aiming to make a meaningful contribution to global efforts in the area. China's Ministry of Commerce has commented on the BRICS summit. An official said much of the focus was on enhancing the facilitation of trade in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. CGTN's Feng Yilei has more.
As the global pandemic ravages public health and triggers a global economic recession, emerging economies are facing severe challenges. In the face of the crisis, the BRICS countries have reached a consensus to combat COVID-19.
Members have decided to further enhance the facilitation of trade by ensuring the flow of key materials, stabilizing global supply chains and industrial chains, creating more opportunities for sectors seriously affected by the pandemic, and minimizing the disruption of the pandemic to international economic and trade cooperation.
The BRICS have vowed to support the reform of the multilateral trading system and the WTO in the face of protectionism and economic decoupling. Specific policies and practice have been introduced to deepen economic and trade cooperation.
Members have endorsed the BRICS Understanding on Investment Facilitation, under which they work actively to build a transparent and predictable legal framework for investments and improve business environment. They've also endorsed the guidelines for promoting effective participation of medium-sized and small enterprises in international trade, which set out measures including enhanced transparency, stronger policy coordination, and better exchanges in regulatory information and practices. To create favorable conditions for MSMEs to conduct trade and investment activities and integrate into the global value chain.
The BRICS have updated their economic partnership strategy. It makes clear their priorities for the next 5 years, mainly in trade, investment, finance, the digital economy, and sustainable development.
Experts say the partnership strategies highlight the cohesion of BRICS while aiming at sectors that are mostly influenced by the pandemic. They say it shows the determination of developing countries to deepen collaboration amid the escalating tensions towards an open and innovative world economy. Feng Yilei, CGTN, Beijing.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. South Sudan's government ready to implement National Dialogue Conference recommendations. And APEC leaders expected to set a new vision to guide the forum's work.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent. to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
History has been made in the Gulf as Bahrain's Foreign Minister Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani lands in Israel. Zayani became the first Bahrainian official to visit Israel. The U.S. brokered meeting is meant to normalize ties between Bahrain and Israel. Stephanie Fried reports.
Bahrain's Foreign Minister, Dr. Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani, met Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem Wednesday, marking the first official visit of a Bahraini government delegation to Israel. Al Zayani held trilateral meetings with Prime Minister Netanyahu and visiting U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. The meetings and visit advanced normalized ties between Israel and Bahrain as part of a U.S. brokered agreement that was signed between the two sides in Washington in September. Israel and Bahrain are looking to broaden tech, tourism, agriculture, trade, and economic cooperation. They are also expected to cooperate on regional strategic alignment vis-à-vis Iran. During the visit, several bilateral agreements were signed between the sides, and the foreign minister's delegation formally approved Israel's request to open a diplomatic mission in Manama.
Israel's reciprocal request for an embassy in Manama has been approved.
Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Tel Aviv.
The 2020 APEC CEO dialogues will start in Malaysia on Thursday. For the first time, it will be held via video this year due to the pandemic. The theme is optimizing human potential towards a resilient future of shared prosperity. Leaders are expected to set a new vision to guide the forum's work. Rian Melza has more.
Countries of the Asia-Pacific only get to host the APEC meeting once every 22 years. And since the new year, Malaysia had been promoting and looking forward to its chance to host what should have been a giant gathering of political and business leaders. Even now, as the pandemic has forced it to go online, Malaysia will play virtual host tomorrow to the APEC CEO dialogues. China's President Xi Jinping and other leaders will make key speeches, and there will be panel discussions involving global business CEOs. The theme, unsurprisingly, is priorities in the aftermath of the pandemic. Friday night, the leaders of economies from Asia and the Americas will meet virtually with the theme of building a resilient future of shared prosperity.
We have to be realistic and pragmatic in our responses to the current situation. While combating the pandemic remains a top priority for all of us, economic recovery must also be accorded equal attention.
Priority areas will be finding ways to reinstill confidence in trade and investment liberalization and using digital technology to boost inclusive economic development.
That could be very timely in the pandemic situation of how we can share resources, how we can share expertise and learn from one another. It can also be very useful going forward to build future food security, health security for the region.
Noticeably absent among the leaders, as with the recent ASEAN summits, will be US President Donald Trump. Even months before the full scale of the pandemic became clear, and before his apparent election loss, Trump made it clear he intended to skip this important regional gathering. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
South Sudan's President Salva Kiir says his government is ready to implement the recommendations of the National Dialogue Conference. The National Dialogue began in 2017 with the aim of involving South Sudanese people from the grassroots levels in finding ways to democratically govern their country. The conference concluded in Juba on Tuesday, marking the end of the dialogue. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
For weeks, representatives from across South Sudan at the National Dialogue Conference have been discussing how their country should be run. One of the recommendations is that South Sudan should have a presidential system. The president should be in power for a maximum of 2 terms. Each term for the president would be limited to 5 years. The leaders of the National Dialogue say recommendations from the conference provide an opportunity for South Sudan's leaders to listen to the people at the grassroots level.
The farmers have never decided anything. It is this year they said to talk and promote their views, which is important so that it goes up. The elite who are the owner of the government are to implement their views. If they don't implement it, they will meet them there during the election.
South Sudan has not had any election since it gained independence in 2011 due to civil war which disrupted democratic processes in the country. The National Dialogue aims to get suggestions from South Sudanese people from all walks of life on what needs to be done to avoid returning to war in the country. President Salva Kiir is promising to implement the outcome of the National Dialogue.
What has been produced in this process must be harmonized with a permanent constitution-making process.
Representatives from all parts of South Sudan participated in the dialogue. However, an opposition group led by Vice President Riek Machar refused to participate in the national dialogue, saying the process began when they were still out of the country. Riek Machar's group also argues that South Sudan's leaders should focus on implementation of the 2018 peace deal. They say it supersedes any other agreement or resolutions being put forward by the National Dialogue Committee. The United Nations mission in South Sudan says the National Dialogue has given a voice to the voiceless in South Sudan.
It's disappointing that not all parties are represented in the dialogue, and I believe those people who are not there have missed an historic opportunity to come together as a people and have their voices heard.
The National Dialogue Committee says it hopes its recommendations will be accepted by all political groups in the country and help bring about lasting peace. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Pregnant women in Zimbabwe have been at greater risk of life-threatening complications during the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic, combined with a health workers' strike, caused a significant disruption to the country's health facilities. Farai Mwakutuya reports.
When COVID-19 broke out in Zimbabwe, health workers, like many other people, were fearful of the new disease. The uncertainty around the pandemic resulted in disruptions to service delivery.
I think initially when someone got infected, we'd say close the facility, and then until maybe we get to the bottom of what has happened.
That cut off expectant mothers' access to critical care.
Initially, about 75% of Zimbabwean women used to deliver under skilled attendants. In other words, under a qualified service provider. Whether it's a midwife, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a nurse who is not a midwife, but it's qualified care. But this went down. From 75% skilled attendants, we were probably getting about 20% skilled attendants.
Which led to an increase in home deliveries.
There used to be hospitals providing cesarean sections for difficult births. But then with COVID now, getting transport to get to the hospital was a problem. So what happened? A number of women were struggling to give birth. And by the time they arrive in hospitals, they actually are fatal. They die.
A health sector strike made matters worse. Almost all of Harare's 42 municipal clinics ground to a halt in July. City of Harare says service has since resumed at 70% of them. But some, like this one behind me, are still closed, meaning women who need to access maternal services here have to travel far to access them. Despite this, the city attended to more pregnant women and more deliveries.
Really, our antenatal care numbers have gone up this year. Actually, figures, when we looked at our figures up to the end of September, we are up by 25% from what we anticipated, which is up 25% from last year's values. That's the same as well as institutional deliveries that are happening within our facilities.
While COVID-19 imperiled many lives, it's also led to innovation in reaching pregnant women in rural areas.
Because they couldn't get to the facilities, we look for the food distribution center, where the health providers of that district will be there that day to also assess nutrition and piggyback some of the maternal health services.
Taking maternity services to women and helping pregnant women access maternity waiting homes could save many lives until the pandemic is brought under control. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Let's now go to Rama Nyang for a look at the day's business news. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. We'll explore why South Africa's president is pitching the country as an attractive investment destination. And as a World Bank delegation is in Cairo to review the performance of the country's economic policies, what are the outcomes from those meetings? The details coming up next.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Let's start this segment in South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa has hosted the third South Africa Investment Conference over the last 2 days. Now, that event is an integral part of the country's efforts to grow domestic and international investment into Africa's most industrialized economy. Initially, the investment target was $75 billion coming over 5 years. This year alone, some 50 firms have committed to investing some $6.8 billion in South Africa. Here's CGTN's Angela Kopler with the details.
In the first 2 years, $41.5 billion worth of investment pledges were received. This year, the focus has shifted slightly, according to President Ramaphosa.
We want to consolidate the commitments that have been made to date to ensure that they are realized, to make sure that these were not just statements and announcements that were pronounced by corporate leaders. We want to see this 664 billion rand translated into new factories, production lines, mining operations, retail outlets, as well as infrastructure.
The mining sector remains important to the South African economy. It's been the biggest recipient of investment flow since 2018, with some $3.8 billion being invested locally. The Minerals Minister has set his priorities.
The first one is aggressive investment on exploration, because exploration is the lifeblood of mining. So if we're not upping up our standards in exploration, mining is not going to grow. The second one is to be more serious in investing in artisanal and small-scale mining, so that we actually mine those minerals that are sterilized by big companies and boost the production of the industry.
Looking back at the last 2 years, Ramaphosa was pragmatic about progress made. 19 projects have been completed or launched. 44 projects are under construction.
Unfortunately, 21 projects representing around 10% total commitments have either been delayed or are on hold as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, something which is quite understandable.
business leaders are feeling upbeat about investment prospects and the country's future.
The future does look positive. I think the issue, though, is the fact that with investments, it's a little at a time. So to the public, it may appear as if nothing is happening. But the important thing is that for us to be able to host events like this is an indication that investors are right behind government. We all want to see a better South Africa, and we are all there to co-create it with government.
There's a sense of optimism in the country at the moment, despite the pandemic and its crippling effects on the economy. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All-Bank delegation is in Cairo to review Egypt's economic policies amidst a slowdown triggered by the coronavirus pandemic. The North African state has largely withstood the bulk of the economic shocks coming through from the COVID-19 pandemic. But serious challenges do remain, and they could limit long-term growth. CGTN's Yasser Hakim explains why.
The World Bank report has commended Egypt's economic and fiscal policies during the pandemic. The North African state has succeeded in keeping growth at over 2.5%, while most of the countries in the region have witnessed major contractions. The report, however, says there are two main issues that need to be addressed by Cairo in order to maintain the success going forward. First is stimulating private sector activity. A sluggish private sector means low tax revenues, low foreign direct investments, and weak exports for manufacturing and non-petroleum industries.
The Ministry of Industry is undergoing several programs and changes to ease the process of establishing factories, cut on bureaucracy and red tape, and facilitate regulations. Foreign investments are currently $9 billion. The government wants to increase that amount through diversification. Among other tools, it has lately tapped into green bonds for the first time to attract investors in green and renewable energy.
Higher private sector activity would solve the second shortcoming addressed in the report, which is job creation.
The World Bank delegation is working with the government to study how to support the SME sector, which is the backbone of the economy, as well as employment. The plans are aimed at expanding the sector further, even if the coronavirus pandemic remains for the long term.
The government is also working on upgrading the skills of the labor force. Training is essential, especially on technology use, to be able to produce higher quality employment opportunities. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
On to East Africa now, where the newly re-elected president of Tanzania, John Pombe Magufuli, has laid out his priorities for the next 5 years. Among other things, he's pledging to focus on the transformation of key parts of a largely agrarian economy, while removing hurdles that are facing investors who want to deploy capital into Tanzania's economy. CGTN's Isaac Lucando has the details.
President John Magufuli is in Parliament to lay out his plans for the next 5 years. Big on his agenda is growing the country's economy. He says achieving his goal will require the efforts of all Tanzanians.
We need to have many Tanzanian billionaires, including parliamentarians. I want all Tanzanians to fully take part in building their country.
The president wants to see economic growth of 8% annually and 8 million jobs created over the next 5 years. He also wants to see increased domestic and foreign investment in the country's industries. To this end, the president is offering tax cuts and improvement of the country's investment climate.
There has been a lot of bureaucracy and hassle for investors and a lot of time wasting, causing them to lose hope. I want an investor with funds to get the necessary permits within 14 days.
The 2020 Doing Business report indicates that Tanzania has climbed 2 positions to the 141st position globally. But the country still lags behind its East African neighbors, Rwanda and Kenya. According to the United Nations 2020 World Investment Report, foreign direct investment in Tanzania reached $1.1 billion in 2019, about a 5% increase from the previous year. President Magufuli hopes that attracting more investment will not only translate into the economic growth he desires, but also into better lives for ordinary Tanzanians. Business people in the country are generally optimistic about the government's plans, but say it must address their challenges.
Most business people had the ability to travel abroad on their own to buy merchandise, but things have become difficult since the coronavirus hit, so we have to use proxies to order things, and so it is really affecting us.
If the government helps us get those investors with deep pockets, I think I can go far and reach where the president was talking about, having many billionaires. I can be among them.
I can be among them.
The road ahead for President Magufuli may not be an easy one. The World Bank projects growth of 4% this year from the previous 7% due to the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Just how well the country navigates these hurdles to improve Tanzanian lives remains to be seen. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
And finally, the embattled South African aviation group Comair, which runs the low-cost carrier Kulula, has opened for passenger bookings ahead of the restart on the 1st of December. Angela Coppola has that story.
In September, the vast majority of the group's creditors and shareholders adopted a business rescue plan, which saw it get a cash injection of $32 million.
Right now, it's important for anyone who wants to be in the domestic South African industry to be flying, because we're coming into our peak summer season, which kicks off beginning of December with the summer holidays. So that's traditionally a busy time of the year for the budget carriers.
It's about market share, and analysts are saying the market isn't the same as it was 9 months ago.
We've got a rather tepid market overall compared with previous years. And we've already got 2 established players who've been mopping up everything since June. And we've got a third player who's new in the form of Lyft that's come into the market.
The Comair consortium owners have decided to focus on the budget carrier Kulula to re-enter the market, keeping the BA franchise on the back burner for now.
I think the carriers are looking to try and fill as many seats as they possibly can. They've got costs that they need to cover. They're not nearly as profitable as they were in the past. And so the game now is to cover the costs and eke out whatever margins are possible in this market. And I think also there'll be some regional traffic. I think, there are people certainly with the ability to travel in some of our neighboring countries who also want to come here either for spending the Christmas season with family or because they want to come on holiday.
While the local market is considered tepid, it's traditionally seen annual compound growth of between 5.5% and 6% per annum.
Mango, Kulula and FlySafe Air have all been the incumbents on the main core domestic routes, but now you've got Lyft and you've got Airlink, which importantly have also become a key player on those core domestic routes, which they never were before.
The airline industry is cutthroat, and it's an overtraded industry as it is, especially in South Africa. And then we're also still waiting to see what happens with SAA and what its intentions will be when it comes back on stream. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And I'll leave you there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour in global business. At that point in time, we're looking at Africa's second largest copper producer. Its economy is forecast to shrink by 4% this year. Its currency has collapsed by at least 40%. But the central bank's held a policy rate at a record low of just 8%. What gives? We'll have some answers for you at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. We'll look at how a young Ugandan artist is turning tattoo passion into business.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Tattoos and scarification in ancient African cultures often signified a particular tribe. They were a form of identity on the outer skin and a mark of pride. But today, contemporary tattoos are often frowned upon, even though they are becoming more popular among young people on the continent. Leon Sinyange brings us the story of a tattoo artist in Uganda who is turning his passion into a business.
It's a sight not often seen in downtown Kampala. A tattoo artist at work in his shop. Jean Jack Karanja's tattoo business grew from humble beginnings.
9 years ago, I was not professional like before. I was just doing work, get a friend and you draw something like that. Though I knew the art, when I traveled a little bit, I had to do the course and master it.
He says every design is different and he takes pride in his attention to detail. Today, he's inking Julius Farage's flowery tattoo. The tattoo enthusiast has traveled all the way from Tanzania.
I wanted a black rose and a red rose. Red is for the love, and black for broken heart.
It takes Jean about 10 minutes to tattoo a simple design. The complicated ones take much more time, even months. The tattoos cost about $30. That is enough to feed an average Ugandan household for a week. Most of Karanja's clients are young people who live in the city, like Ahmed Mutebi. He has been inked at least 5 times.
Right now, I want to get like 2. One, I want to have some wordings in between my chest. Then I want to have a tribal tattoo on this side of the breast. Then I want to feel the arm. Then I want to have one on the leg. So I don't know. As time goes on, I may ink the whole body.
But tattoo shop owners have to counter negative public perception of body art. They say they are often judged as society's outsiders. A perception Karanja hopes will change.
Before, you are kind of disguised like to be someone bad or some thug. It was taken to that extent, to that bad extent of impression. But now, it is normal. Its fashion is unique. Actually, to have a tattoo is unique.
Despite the COVID-19 pandemic affecting his business, Karanja has seen his artistic works blossom. He receives at least 20 clients a month and is aiming to build an international tattoo network. Leon Sinyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, time now to look at your sports news. Here's what's coming up. Tunisia men's volleyball team back in training as they prepare for Tokyo 2020 qualifiers.
How would you create your legend? On the fields,